So this is the first of the diagnosis of Fleet Street, that is the London-based print newspapers of Monday the 24th of August 2020. Now this is later than usually broadcast this edition of the diagnosis of the media. And the reason is that in the previous edition, we concentrated the time on the protests against the eviction ban fiasco and pandemonium and idiocy and dishonesty that Robert Jenrick, the housing minister or the cabinet minister in Boris Johnson's government, at the expense of people's housing rights, has been forced into announce an extension to the so-called ban on court proceedings against people renting from private, quote, landlords. Landlords is a completely unacceptably, outrageously misleading and disrespectful word. Landlord. I mean, Lord is obviously a title that is reserved for the divine being. But in Britain, the Lord is anyone who is in possession of illicit loads of money or is monetarily at an advantageous position in comparison with the people who they rent their properties to, and so on. So this is part of the history, part of the hundreds of years of injustice in the system of so-called governance that we know in this country. And we should be coming to that later. This is the bit from the Daily Express from yesterday, August 23rd. I say Daily Express because it's the same paper. On Sundays it is called Sunday Express, and on other days it's called Daily Express, but it's absolutely the same stables, the same kind of editorial fabricators and fakers and racists that produce this paper. But it is about the migrants, and we'll be coming to that in detail in the later part of this diagnosis. But essentially what they're doing, they're saying that Priti Patel steps up campaign to kick out foreign criminals. Now that is completely typical of the ultra-right racist rhetoric and sloganeering. Kick out foreign criminals. What is more criminal about a foreign criminal as compared to a domestic criminal? There is absolutely no explanation for this distinction except that it is being used to hype up racist hatred. Foreign implies her parents who came from East Africa after being kicked out by the anti-Asian African regimes that began the campaign in the late 1960s and succeeded in that campaign in ousting a large number of Asians who were living in East Africa, owning kind of small businesses and that kind of enterprise. So Priti Patel, whose parents were kicked out by anti-Asian racists in control in Africa at the time in the 60s, late 60s and early 70s. She is now threatening to behave exactly as the racist anti-Asian African dictators and crooks in power behaved in the time that her parents had to leave the East African country. And that shows the hypocrisy of these papers because they don't make any reference to all of these that I am talking about in terms of Priti Patel being the daughter of parents that were kicked out for the race, which is what she is doing to other people as she occupied the post of the Interior Ministry in the Boris Johnson fronted regime. And so they're saying that the UK is a hub for ruthless leaders of trafficking gangs. The UK indeed is a hub for ruthless leaders, but the ruthless leaders are not, the main ruthless leaders are not so far from the headline. Ruthless leaders include this one, Priti Patel, and her boss, her leader, Boris Johnson, and his leader, Dominic Cummings, and his consultant, Nigel Farage. So those leaders are the ones that are creating the actual narrative of hatred against people who are really in control of a very small part of the criminal action. And that is only being used, that information is only being used to justify the currently ongoing hate campaign against the migrants who are clearly foreign and migrants. These conjure up in the brainwashed people's minds the image of Africans and Asians invading this country. All the evidence that is ordinarily available evidence, day-to-day encounters and day-to-day experience, all the evidence available in this country of behavior of people, so-called migrants, in any significant number, the so-called migrants, if they can be categorized and identified as migrants, shows that being a migrant into the UK has never been linked with any increased propensity or tendency on the part of the migrant person to commit crime. In fact, the opposite. And yet the newspapers like the Express, the newspapers tell lies and have been telling lies, and they've been publishing fake headlines and fake news for decades before the terms fake news and misinformation and fake headlines and whatever became part of the common experience in the age of the internet and social media and other outlets of dissemination of brainwashing information. Now, the Daily Boris Graph, which is the Telegraph, as we have said, has been paying bribe money to Boris Johnson for years. The Telegraph has become Boris Graph because it has been blindly supporting the ambition of this irresponsible, antisocial, opportunist, careerist, racist for a long time. And that has it is the Boris Graph that has funded Boris Johnson significantly, and it is the only one known to be the only Fleet Street kind of publishing outlet or operation that has been funding a politician so brazenly and so corruptly and so racistly and so illegally, so unlawfully. Now, against all the evidence of this corruption, illegality, and criminality and racism on the part of the Daily Boris Graph, there has been no actual holding him to account or holding the Boris Graph to account by anything, including the so-called National Union of Journalists, and not by the so-called rival, the Guardian, and most certainly not by the opposition MPs in the House of Commons. Not only the Labour Party has not only has the Labour Party failed to raise this as an issue of any kind of traction, any kind of tangible kind of attention, but it has allowed the abuse of the so-called freedom of expression, the freedom of press, to be abused by Boris Johnson and the Boris Graf for years, and Corbyn himself included hasn't made any big wave against that abuse. Why does it matter? Because in various stages, in the original availability of this lying newspaper, so-called, printing a big lie, I mean, it gets repeated and copied and imitated by others. Being one of the, quote, Fleet Street papers, automatically in the arrangement of things in the business or in the trade of press, circulation, distribution, syndication, and copying and imitating texts and stories, it is guaranteed that anything that appears in a paper, like the Daily Telegraph, Boris Graf, or the Times, or any of the other titles, no matter how stupid its contents, gets automatically copied by news agencies. In the case of the internal UK news agencies, it is the Press Association, which is like a sewer. It repeats stuff that appear in the papers, and it happens the other way as well. Some of the stuff that appear in the papers are direct copies sold to them by the Press Association news agency. That is the internal UK or England and Wales kind of domestic news service, so-called, or news business. Internationally, of course, there are Reuters, and there is the AFP, and the American one. There are several ones from the operating from the USA, and all of these are staffed by people whose only motivating factor behind their activities is their job, not the morality, not the ethics, not the legality. And this is why this is the diagnosis, this edition or these editions and these broadcasts and these talks and these reports, these updates are exclusive, world exclusive, because no one else is doing this. And as I said before, and I say again, for the records and for the evidence, if anyone else is doing the same kind of or similar kind of diagnosis, I am absolutely interested to know who they are and what the contents of what they are doing are. I have been diagnosing the media long before the online availability of online kind of outlets and long before television access was available. I've been doing it in print and in writing and for a very long time. And this is something that I have been doing exclusively, entirely ethically, morally, strictly based on the evidence, not for any other purpose except to tell the truth and to locate the truth and to identify the lies and examine the evidence of the lying and the lies. So the diagnosis of the lies that are, in other words, the Fleet Street newspapers, is an essential moral duty and service to humanity and the world and to community and to the cause of universal education. And all the right-wingers, all the racists who were combined in the Brexit tent are now backing Boris Johnson in the propaganda against those who are concerned about this safety being kind of put at risk by the stunt of opening the schools. All the racists are backing Boris Johnson. All the Brexiteers are backing Boris Johnson. All the right-wingers are backing Boris Johnson in the call to open the schools. And this is being done against the sane, wise, informed opinion of concerned citizens, concerned parents, concerned teachers, and many concerned school boys and school girls who are old enough to know what the implications are. And this is the other piece in the front page of the Daily Boris Graph is a piece about Tony Hall, who is the outgoing Director General of the BBC. And Hall is an embodiment, to use that word, borrowed from the language of others. It is not my conception, but the embodiment is a very accurate, expressive word. Now, Tony Hall is an embodiment of the worst lying perpetrated by the BBC. And he is absolutely devoid of morality and ethics in his behavior, in his role. And he's been given this space by the Boris Graph because it is referring to Brexit as a positive thing. And they are Brexiteers. And Brexiteers are actually the racists in this country, and they are destroying the cause of democracy, cause of constitutionality, cause of due process, cause of impartiality, cause of the truthfulness and universality of entitlements of people to the protection, the benefits of society. And the contents of the BBC have been absolutely servile to the agenda of the racists that were maneuvering to take over control from the previous two quote leaders, Cameron and Theresa May. And these racists are now in place, and they are running a hysteric campaign against the most vulnerable people fleeing persecution, poverty, hunger, and famine. And that agenda is identical with the agenda of supporting the builders of properties and degeneration buildings under the cover of housing, but in fact as big business operations to sell to the wealthy and to remove the availability of housing from access to the most needy people in most need of housing. And the language that the racists use is a language that they borrow and steal from the ordinary, objective observers and investigators and socially conscientious and conscious reporters and commentators, as is the case on the page 14 of the Boris graph, which is the page opposite the so-called leader page. It's the comment page where they have got two racist liars given column spaces. One is Julia Hartley Brewer, an extremely poisonous racist liar and warmonger, an antagonist to the idea that Muslims have the same rights as anybody else. She supported, and she still supports, Tony Blair's attack on the innocent Muslims in Iran, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, the whole region. And she's still boasting of having supported Tony Blair in mounting the collaboration attack against the Iraqi people and the Afghani people under the name of fighting extreme Muslims and extreme Islam. And on the editorial page, there is a piece by Tim Stanley. Tim Stanley is a soft-spoken or comparatively soft-spoken member of the Daily Boris Graph kind of platform, who is now saying that Donald Trump is not all that bad. Now, the list of Donald Trump's crimes against humanity, against democracy, against constitutionality is so long that it will need at least 3 months to actually comprehensively present to the public in an understandable, accessible way. It is that bad. And yet Tim Stanley, who poses on the BBC and the Sky News as a thinking reviewer of the press, he is one of those, is actually peddling such a brazen lie. So that can give an idea as to the role of the Daily Boris Graph and the corruption, the daily corruption that it represents and it perpetuates and it perpetrates. So the newspapers are not telling the truth. In fact, they are forcefully and forcibly imposing brazen lies before the persons and before the people. And the people, ordinary people, or even the readers of the Boris Graph, who are supposedly mainly people in the older age groups and have got money, enough money, to do whatever they like with their lives. Very small number of the readership of the Daily Telegraph are in low income and are likely to support the opposite parties, opposed to the Conservatives or the Tories, which is the home of the Telegraph. So the newspapers are not only not objective, not fair, not truthful, they're openly not telling the truth. They're openly asserting the right to tell lies and deny the truth, deny the basic, ordinarily perceived realities of life in society. And they're now embarked on the double war, one, to deny the existence of the pandemic and to force people to come back to work, force the ordinary schools to open, and then force the resumption of a hard, H-A-R-D, hard version of the herd immunity, which is H-E-R-D, herd immunity, which is what they did in the actual beginning months, in late February and early March and up to April. They took away all safety precautions and care from the most vulnerable people, and they allowed thousands of people to be killed by that. And there is a completely ridiculous, ineffective call by the Kia Starmer-fronted so-called opposition that there should be investigation. What is there to investigate? It was happening right before the public. There is nothing, no secret. They were doing it openly. That's the whole thing. To say that any mass murder, which is what the WSWS.org organization has described Boris Johnson's behavior to be mass murder of the elderly, and the majority of the people proportionately were from the African and Asian backgrounds. There is nothing to investigate. It was done openly. As Boris Johnson completely defies the basic rules and duties of governance, and Starmer capitulates and colludes daily by silence or distraction. So he was doing that thing as it was happening. And so what we are looking at is every time we examine the contents and the role and the connections, we see the media, the Fleet Street Press and the BBC are colluding in an open, brazen violation of people's rights in this country. And this is not going to be changed to the people in power and the Fleet Street and the media and the press turning into accountable servants of the people and providers of the truth and the truthful information and insight and protection to the people that people deserve. And this goes on in the contents of, from the contents of the Daily Boris Graph to the contents of the Financial Times, which is promoting the Financial Times, which cover price is £2.90 today, Monday, the 24th of August 2020. And its main front page is a promotion for Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is strategically attempting to fast track UK COVID-19 vaccine before election. So he's seeking to score a double kind of win as part of the propaganda for the election due in November, which he's trying to steal in advance and rob in advance. So this is the Financial Times giving Donald Trump a cheap opportunity for promoting his candidacy at the election in the USA. And it is also, in effect, shielding Boris Johnson from any criticism. And this is the, on the inside of the Financial Times, there is a piece about Trump benefits, not actually benefiting the jobless people in the USA. The same thing is happening in Britain, where Rishi Sunak, who was overhyped as the magician finance minister who was solving the problem of the economy, brought on by the pandemic, is being exposed as having spent most of the public borrowing or publicly borrowed money or money borrowed in the name of the state in funding his fellow hedge fund operatives and colleagues and big business and big banks and others. So the expression public borrowing is completely misleading, typically, just as the expression public school is misleading. Because public school is not only nothing to do with the access available to it for the public, ordinary people, but it is hostile to the public idea, as happened in the most recent and the most brazen so far to date, robbery of the grades of the ordinary school children, and the public schools were given advantage by the corrupt system that's supposed to be regulating, and it's corruptly conceived and contrived algorithm. The algorithm, as I've said, like Latin in the case of Boris Johnson, is a language. So any language you can use to tell lies as well as to tell the truth. It depends on what you want to do and what you are able to get away with if you are telling the lies. And the algorithm, corruption and robbery, has been exposed as symptomatic of the systemic, historic corruption that is inherent, built in the education industry operated from the universities, Oxford, Cambridge, and others, the Russell Group, so-called, including the corrupt Birmingham University and other crookedly run universities, as well as in the colleges and other institutions that sell British education abroad under the various guises of British being the best. The British education system is a very corrupt system, and the evidence of that need not be sought or looked for abroad. In Britain, there are generations of British people of all backgrounds, but mainly white people, generations of white people from ancestors, white ancestors, have been in poverty, generations after generation after generation. Poverty and deprivation and being denied franchise, that is a say in what happens to society they're supposed to be part of. And that could not have been happening in a country where the education business was being done fairly and for the purpose of creating a society that was fair and equal and equally accessible and just, and justice was available to the victims of injustice. Which raises the question from page 2 of the Financial Times, they're talking about the legal system, the Crown Court. Lawyers warn over backlog of criminal cases. Now, this is again, in my narrative, my diagnosis, this is again treating the legal system not as system of justice. As I said, there is no justice system in this country, never has been, and never will be, without true revolutionary replacement of this whole apparatus by moral, ethical, and accountable and transparent alternative that ordinary people, victims of injustice, have been crying out for a long time but not been given. Now, this is saying that ministers are under pressure to deal with delays, some jury trials pushed back to 2022. Now, this is complete diversion because it is not talking about the contents of the jury trial, the implications of the jury trial, the impact of the jury trial. And the jury trials are a sham on the evidence. When they were conceived, when they were introduced a long time ago, the equations in the society and in the world were quite different, and many factors have come in, and none of those factors have been actually introduced into the jury system to make it modern, make it relevant, and make it deliver justice or fairness, a fair outcome for the people affected by it. So, for example, because to give full details of every case will take hundreds of years, but essentially, the jury trial is kind of like a smoke screen. It's a dressage, it's a kind of image Most of it is an image. And the image is to present the system and the bureaucracy as a publicly accessed one, as a ordinary people's kind of decisions made by the jurors, fair and not some kind of secret, unseen cabal. But the jury system is itself a visible, exposed, well exhibited cabal. Because the parameters, the actual criteria, various requirements that are put into the system operating are prejudiced and biased and totally, absolutely in breach of all those charters, declarations, conventions, and treaties that I have been talking about in the last many years. And I'm talking about on these records in the last 2 months. And what is happening in the jury system, I shall give an example from the, let's say, the last 20 cases. Last 20 cases where either police persons or racists in the public were prosecuted or accused of being racist or being unfair to the victims, African people or Asian people. All the trials staged in various parts of the country, and I'm absolutely certain not arranged in a way that the various juries involved had any knowledge about or access to or any conferring with their fellow jurors in other trials. But the pattern is that they all acquitted the racists. This is not a conjecture. Anyone viewing this and needing to check the veracity, the truthfulness and accuracy of what I'm saying can check. They can go and do the research on all the cases, especially the last 20 cases involving last 20 cases that have been heard in the Crown Courts in the UK involving prosecutions of people accused of racism. The accused either belonging to the police or to the public, it doesn't matter. The essential pattern is that they have been acquitted. Now the people, like in the case of the victims of sexual abuse and rape, if the rapist gets away, the victim doesn't feel generous or kind or in any way that justice has been done. Justice to them has been done. Similarly, victims of racist attacks and violence, racist denial, discrimination, whatever the case details are, they don't feel that they have got any justice in this country and in this legal system and the legal bureaucracy that is operated through the Crown Court, because the Crown Courts are the criminal side of the equivalence of the courts that actually allow trials by jury. And the jurors' reason is not explained why they acquit these accused. But I'm giving the reason. The reason is that they're brainwashed. And the brainwashing takes place over a long time, long period. And the society that allows brainwashing on that scale is not a society that can be allowed to call itself functioning. And the fact that we have someone like Boris Johnson as the holder of the post of Prime Minister actually explains how dysfunctional this whole society is and how the vast majority of the people in this country are being denied basic human rights, which is the case of the protesters that staged their demonstrations during Monday, the 24th of August, notably in London, in Catford in Lewisham, and in Stratford in Newham, and in other parts of the country as well. And they held the demonstration as planned against the lifting of the ban on court proceedings for evictions. And although the ban has been extended by 3 more weeks up to the 20th of September, the implication of the system that allows the prosecution of people or the applications under Section 21, which is no fault eviction application or possession applications, is that most people's human rights and right to housing and right to their lives, livelihoods are denied and taken away and are not recognized. And most of the people, by definition, are white people. So when they say that they are doing Brexit to help indigenous, that is mainly white people, or they are violating the migrants' human rights, or they're kicking out foreign criminals, they're doing this to appease, to falsely put in a state of kind of confidence and security about this government or this regime. And that sense, they want to instill in the minds of the mainly white people that are vulnerable to daily brainwashing and lies. So what we have here in the demonstrations are, of course, numerically the people who demonstrated in Catford in Lewisham or in Stratford in Newham. Their numbers are not huge, but the principle is valid. And the principle is that they are doing that because the Labour Party is not actually up to the task. The Labour Party is completely silent in real terms about the impact of the robbery of home and robbery of housing rights from hundreds of thousands of people. And as the various agencies and researchers have confirmed and agreed, there is anything between 8 million to 12 million people without proper housing rights in this country. It is much more, many more, than the number of votes that will make the difference in any election. And yet, that huge potential for persuading the people denied housing rights and home rights and rights, other rights that are lost because of they are not having the proper secure home, and they cannot pursue their education, they cannot pursue their independent craft and skills, and they cannot make a decent living for themselves. All of these have been lost and squandered by the Labour Party so-called opposition. And as I have said in previous records and previous posts and previous speeches and comments, and I shall continue to say this because it is all absolutely based on facts and evidence. The reason the Labour Party is in a relationship of detachment from the electorate generally is not because the Labour Party doesn't have historically in its frame the resources, the capacity, the moral capacity, the democratic capacity, the ethical capacity to deliver the best set of government in the circumstances that is possible in this country. It is because the individuals who are leading the Labour Party, the individuals who are in posts making decisions and posts in locally elected councils, including locally elected mayors and in parliament. And I'm talking about, say, the last, let's say, 30 years. The 30 years, most of it, since I did that broadcast on Channel 4 news slot in January 1992, telling then Conservative Prime Minister to focus energy and attention on helping African people, Asian people in the big, large countries, large demographies, I mean, that were letting their people down and keeping their people in poverty of all kinds. And I told John Major to address the poverty at home in those countries. And I said that in the context of the nightmare, hysteria that would happen in the West if they didn't, which is what is happening now. I said 28 years ago that poverty would drive the people, famine would drive the people, hunger would drive the people to leave their homes, their homelands. So the best way to prevent Britain being threatened, in the language of the racists, I'm using the word threatened within quotation marks, by migrants, would be to help, really help the people in those countries to deal with the lack of human rights, lack of civil rights, lack of democracy, lack of fairness, lack of fair access to justice, judicial outcome that was fair and accessible and not beyond the capacity and the powers of the people. Now, in this country, they are running the campaign against the migrants, and they're also depressing, suppressing millions of people in Britain from having proper housing rights, proper homes, and secure neighborhoods. And the crimes on the estates in the so-called inner city or kind of deprived areas, the crimes are fostered, they are created, they're allowed, they're kind of sponsored by the local kind of triumvirate, the local councils, the local party careerists, and the local law enforcement so-called agencies and the local members of parliament. So eviction is one aspect of the deprivation and the denial of the human rights to housing. Because even if people are not evicted from those estates, most of the estates are intimidated into staying silent and intimidated into dysfunction, intimidated into losing their potential as members of the household or individual tenant or individual resident in those areas because of the operation of gangs, criminal gangs that belong to the same kind of ethnic and racial backgrounds. And the police do not register as doing anything to stop that. It's not a kind of stunt operation fronted by the London Mayor Sadiq Khan appearing early morning somewhere in the dawn raid or something like that. That cannot be the action that the police must take. And that is not the action that the mayor is bothered about taking. Why that is can be for various reasons, including the fact that Sadiq Khan is beholden to the criminal big masters and mistresses that run the city hall or whatever. But Sadiq Khan is failing as the mayor of London to protect people on estates. That is beyond the eviction kind of crisis, if you like. Ordinary people who are not evicted but are allowed to stay in their flats, which is mainly what they are, not houses like, in the tree-lined streets, but these are flats in really badly architectured and badly constructed buildings. And that is something that we'll be talking about another time, about why so much bad architecture is to be found in the places where there is council or so-called social housing. And again, that is a negative commentary and comment on the futility of the leadership of the Labour Party. The ideals, the values for which the Labour Party was founded more than 100 years ago were absolutely correct, and they were intended for that time, and they are still valuable and relevant today as they were more than 100 years ago. But the leaders of the Labour Party, or the place people, place men and place women, carrying so-called adherence or allegiance to the Labour Party, are not even bothering to know what those values are, let alone implement them, let alone fight for them. So the eviction crisis is a symptom of the disease of Labour Party disengagement from the duties to uphold the rights of people in the court system. And the court system, the reason why the demonstrations outside the Stratford court and the court in equivalent in Catford, in Lewisham, and another demonstration in Leeds and other places in England, they are relevant because the courts are dysfunctional. The courts are prejudiced, the courts are corruptly led, and the court decision makers are ignorant, prejudiced, biased, and in the case of populations that are mixed, including African and Asian, and the litigants include a significant number of people, litigants or potential targets of eviction proceedings are African and Asian people. These courts are manned and women by, or manned and women by, a significant number of majority judges or magistrates who are racists. And the Labour Party doesn't do anything. And the fact that the Labour Party doesn't do anything is evident in the fact that there is no reference in any of the reports about the court system about what the Labour Party says. And it doesn't say anything in this piece in the Financial Times about the Crown Courts. It's a completely soulless, completely plasticky game of numbers, that there are too many cases, backlog, and that is what their concern is. It's not about the dysfunction inherent in the system and the injustice inherent in the system and the total obstruction to the victims of eviction and eviction proceedings and eviction attacks being denied the say, denied the presentation of the actual truth. And there is this other thing, of course, that goes with the kind of propaganda about the court system, which is the factor of the role of the lawyers. There is no such thing as lawyers, because everyone is a lawyer. Everyone who is a student of law, everyone is a scholar in legal facts and legal processes, is a lawyer. But by lawyer in this country, they don't recognize any scholar of the law. They mean anyone who has got license to appear in the court. And the license holders are very small in number compared to the people who need proper legal representation. So you've got solicitors who are licensed by the Law Society and regulated by the so-called Solicitors Regulation Authority. And you got the barristers who are the counterparts, equivalents in terms of the procedure to the solicitors, and they are regulated by the Bar Standards Board. The Inner Temple, the Middle Temple, Gray's Inn, and Lincoln's Inn. 2 temples and 2 inns. These are controlled by or populated by the overwhelming majority of barristers and the overwhelming majority of solicitors in practice are licensed law traders. That's what I call them. I created the phrase licensed law trader. I'm a law scholar. I'm a scholar of law. I'm a scholar of legal things, and I've been advocating legal rights and constitutionality and all the rest of it for a very long time. And I have more knowledge of the law than any single person among the licensed law traders. And I've said this on the record. And I include the likes of Michael Mansfield, the likes of David Pennick, etc., and the likes of David Neuberger, who not long ago, 2 years ago, I think, left the post of president of the Supreme Court. So what I'm saying is that I'm not accepted. My opinion is not accepted as that of a quote lawyer, because I haven't got a license to trade as a lawyer. That is absurd. And that is what I think is the reason why there is no actual legal recourse to most people. Because most people who need legal representation in the court system don't have the money that the licensed law traders charge. And because the conservatives' agenda has been to deny people more and more of whatever rights they have had over the years, there is hardly any way that even 5% of the population of the people in need of legal representation can get the legal representation. So by default, the absolute majority, the overwhelming majority of the people in Britain who need legal redress are being denied. And that denial is in breach again of those 4 things: the conventions, the treaties, the declarations, and the agreements and the international treaties that Britain is still signed up to. And I have appeared in many courts, in many forms, and I have found the judges, the ones that I appeared before, if you like, except 1 or 2, the majority of the judges are absolutely ignorant and brazenly racist and totally stupid in their assertions. They may know the various laws, but they are actually abusing their positions, misusing their positions. And this is not being monitored, this is not being actually held to account, and this is not being exposed. And that is what the Financial Times is not doing. Clear. The Financial Times is peddling these numbers and this concern about the backlog. And it is insulting the Labour Party, saying that one of the Tony Blair kind of cabinet ministers, Charlie Faulkner, is saying, I'm really worried. The Lord Chancellor needs to get going with this. It's about finding bigger courts and better use of existing places. If we don't do something as a matter of urgency, it will get worse and worse. But that's it. Charlie Faulkner, who became notorious over the kind of dome in Greenwich, his disaster of the dome, and what has happened since the end of the Blair-fronted and Brown-fronted Labour kind of regime is that they have not made any inroads into changing the existing dysfunctional, corrupt system. And Faulkner is being given just a token, regular, routine, ritualistic mention here by the Financial Times. Now, this is something that is absolutely rare for the Daily Telegraph, sorry, Daily Mail. That the hospital is accused of baby death cover-up. Now, again, this is not a one-off event. This is happening every day. Hospitals, as I said, and I have been saying, the hospitals are operating under the banner of the NHS, but they are being controlled by a whole number of careerists making the decisions that have no respect for the right of the patient and the right of life, or right to life of the patient. And there is no accountability. Since the 1940s, when the NHS was actually kind of started, the NHS has never been able to breathe as NHS was said, intended by Bevan and others to be. So it's not accountable and it's not delivering. There are instances that it is delivering, but the majority of the cases are being hidden, are being denied, they are not being reported. And this is a rare occasion. And they've got this rare occasion item that actually doesn't say what I'm saying. It doesn't say what the evidence says. It doesn't say the history of the NHS being suffocated from becoming NHS at the point of need, and objective and unbiased and equal, compassionate, regardless of the person seeking and needing NHS care. And the cases of the two Asian children that have been in the news recently, whenever the incident happened, is less important than the facts that they illustrate about the NHS. One happened in the Northeast where the child's parents, both of them are doctors, and the father was actually arrested by the police and he almost died under the attack that took place while he was being arrested. And the reason why he was arrested was the NHS hospital where his dying daughter was being so-called under treatment. The doctors disagreed with him. He said, and his wife said, both of them doctors, that the daughter had a chance of surviving and that she should not be allowed to die, that she should be treated. So the doctors disagreed with the parents' plea to let their daughter carry on receiving treatment. So they disagreed. So in order to kill the child, they called the police. So the hospital unit became a military or police unit. And the parents who wanted to save their child were turned into criminals. Now that is one example. And I don't have to give every single component of the fact there. That is enough as evidence. And that is what is happening inside the NHS. And the 8 p.m. clapping for NHS heroes does not include that kind of fact, because that would be inconvenient. And the other case is from East London, a couple of Asian persons. The mother is a solicitor, licensed law trader herself. And she and the father of the child, another child who was seriously ill, they were told that the child had no chance of living and should be killed. They said that they should be killing her. And the parents disagreed and took court action. The short detail is that the child is now undergoing treatment in Italy. And the doctors there are quite happy to treat that child. Whereas in London, which happened in the London hospital in Whitechapel, the doctors were too enthusiastic to kill that child. It's not me making up, it is on the records. So this is the reality of the NHS and the reality of the care, and all these advertisements that they put on and all the cheering that they put on are absolutely misleading and covering up deaths as routine. So this is not truthful representation by the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail should say that yet another cover-up, not just one-off cover-up. Anyway, the fact that Boris Johnson is in control, supposedly, of the power posts or positions, and Corbyn hasn't done anything wrong to let the community or the people down in the context of the pandemic and the pandemonium regime that Boris Johnson is fronting, that Corbyn is innocent of all those, he is still guilty in the eye of the Daily Mail, which says Corbyn sabotaged his own election campaign. Corbyn's aides, he was always late and had tantrum over bus. Now, that is not something that the Daily Mail should be complaining about. They should be cheering that Corbyn sabotaged his own election campaign. Of course, Corbyn is intellectually less capable than he should be and need be. And I have been saying it for a long time, and I have done that on evidence, on fact, not because I have an agenda against Corbyn or I speak against Corbyn's conduct on behalf of anybody else. I speak on the evidence solely, absolutely, and objectively. And what I'm saying about the Daily Mail is that it is absolutely biased against the Labour Party. And that is not a trivial point. The Daily Mail has no right to be biased against the Labour Party when the Labour Party is the alternative to the current present government, and the Labour Party should be supported in pointing out the flaws and failures and betrayals and the corruption in the current government. But the Daily Mail never has supported the Labour Party. And again, the Labour Party itself has never held the Daily Mail to account, despite the fact that it ran a very violent, virulent, anti-Ed Miliband campaign, accusing Ed Miliband's father of being a foreign kind of enemy. And this was portrayed by supporters of the Ed Miliband family and his father, Ralph Miliband, the late academic Ralph Miliband, that it was clearly poisoned by the Daily Mail's anti-Jewish prejudice. I don't know to what extent that is the explanation, but the fact is that the Daily Mail went to town against Ralph Miliband. And Ralph Miliband was not a criminal, and Ralph Miliband never did any kind of harm to society. And what is happening is that they are still looking for any excuse to put a negative kind of image on the leader of the Labour Party, whoever the leader is or whoever has been the leader. And the loss that the people in this country suffer as a result of the Daily Mail lying is that they don't get the support of proper health service. They don't get the support of the proper housing, and they don't get the equal kind of rights in every filled in every stage, at every level in society, because the people who control this media are doing the media in order to lie to people, lie against people. And it's a war. It's a war against the ordinary majority of the people. So the slogan, the many being victimized by the few, applies in this case, Daily Mail's case, in the case of the Daily Express, and in the case of the Sun and the Star. And the Express is literally repeating the same line that the Daily Mail said, that Corbyn sabotaged his own election battle. And they're opposite, 2 pages later, they're painting Johnson in the most glorious light. He takes control. Taking control was one of the lying claims that the Brexiteers ran. And then they are saying that ravers are threatening safety. If Boris Johnson takes control, is true, and if Boris Johnson actually is right to say that the schools should be allowed to come back and must come back and be open because there is no threat, then how is it that the Express is running that story about ravers threatening safety? And this is the contradiction exposed openly in the contents of the Daily Express. And yet, the actual failure of Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party is that they don't point this out. And I'm saying that there should be a platform that should be backed by the Labour Party, by the other opposition parties, that should carry the actual truth every single day. Every single day, that the truth is being hidden, distorted, concealed, and sabotaged and denied by the Fleet Street papers, the Daily Express, the Daily Mail, the Daily Borisgraph, and the Sun. Even the Daily Mirror is backing Johnson and painting him as making a plea to the parents to send the children. And they are doing this 2-page spread for Boris Johnson. And that is because the Daily Mirror is in support of the leadership of Keir Starmer. And Keir Starmer supports the lie that there is no pandemic anymore and the schools are safe. And Kevin McGuire, who is he's an associate editor or something on the Daily Mirror. He's an opportunist face that appears on the BBC and the Sky News and ITV GMB slot for so-called newspaper reviews. He does the opportunistic review, as I say, they do that. He does that in partnership with his chum from the right-wing racist Daily Mail, Andrew Pierce. And he is praising Keir Starmer, saying that Keir Starmer earns top marks as Boris Johnson flops. This is the line they're running, that Boris Johnson will dismantle himself and Keir Starmer will just walk in. They've got a thing coming. That will not happen. Even if Boris Johnson flops even more, there won't be an easy walk into number 10 Downing Street by Keir Starmer. And the Daily Star is again trivializing the crisis and running the stupid piece on the front page, which has no connection with the loss of housing rights by the people and the destruction of families, the destruction of the lives of the children, in single parent families, there are always holes and gaps, and the complete permanent growth in single parents household, children growing up in one parent kind of family units, is both symptom of the disease of social failure and lack of social care and lack of governance by the conservatives and the Labour Party. But it is a self-perpetuating kind of phenomenon that keeps, as I said before, generations of people in poverty. And that has to be broken. That has to be broken by first acknowledging it as a very serious violation of many rights at many levels. And that has to be linked with the fact that in most of the families living in that kind of arrangement, single parent families, they are also located on the estates, council estate that are, or council areas that are dominated by gangs of criminals, local criminals. And the criminals have got no accountability to their communities, the community they destroy, and the police don't take action against them, not anywhere nearly enough. And I link this to the white girls that were targeted by the mainly Asian grooming gangs. When the Times first broke the story, they said that the reason or the reasons for the police not taking action against the criminals included the police fear that if they prosecuted or arrested these criminals, then there would be a backlash against the police along the lines that the police were being racist. Now, this is not only a lie, this is a calculated, poisonous, racist lie. Because the police are harassing, stopping, searching, and undermining and refusing to take the reports coming from people who are Asian and African every single day. And nobody is protesting against any of those activities by the police as a routine. And the number of criminals that are actually on trial in Crown courts, even now, even during the last 1 year, the number contains a very significant proportion of African criminals accused or accused criminals or Asians. And nobody is holding a demonstration outside the courts for those prosecutions. Because African and Asian people want wrongdoers and criminals to be dealt with by the legal system if the system is just and fair, just as much as anybody else. And to make that allegation that there would be a backlash of claims that the police were taking action against the sex grooms in the Rochdale and other Oldham and Keighley and other places is absolutely intentionally devised racist excuse to pass away the blame from the police's failures, the council's failures, onto the imaginary image of the anti-racists. And that is something that the Labour Party has a lot of responsibility for, because it has been aware of this and it has not taken action against the gangs, and it has not taken action against the colluders of the gangs. And so therefore there is absolutely no justification on the facts, on the evidence, that the police are prevented or precluded or discouraged from taking action against really bad persons on the estates. So why are the local councils silent as well? This is the diagnostic question. And the Sun is, of course, running the same contradictory double kind of line. One is that the school should come back, and on the next page, it is saying that the raving parties are endangering lives. How can that be? If it is safe for schools to come back because there is no pandemic anymore or the virus anymore, then how can the raving mad persons, party goers, threaten people's safety by exposing them to virus? So the diagnosis, the word diagnosis is this kind of brazen lies. This is not a fantasy interpretation by me. It is on the pages of these papers. They're lying. And they're lying in the knowledge that the lies would not be pointed out and they would not be held to account. So on those points, and there is no mention about housing rights, no mention about the eviction and the virus of eviction and lies and greed and profiteering by the landlords and the collusion by the local councils. One of the demonstrators outside the Stratford Magistrates Court during today, Monday, the 24th of August 2020, said the name Lynn Brown. Now, Lynn Brown is one of the two MPs from the two constituencies in Newham, which is where Stratford is. So Lynn Brown's name was mentioned and she was described as a landlady. That is to say, she has got properties. She rents out her property or properties. The key line was that she doesn't respond to campaigners or others who need help, phone calls or communications. And there was an echo of agreement with that line that was spoken about Lynn Brown. And as I said in the afternoon session, that Lynn Brown is known for that. For months, I've been copying to her communications that are legal communications, investigative questions addressed to Newham Council. And I've been making copies available to her and to the other MP, Stephen Timms. And Lynn Brown has not answered. Her automatic answer has been that she gets large numbers of correspondence. So it would be quite a while before she gets to dealing with the particular communication, but she never does. And there is a serious anti-democratic failure in what Lynn Brown and Stephen Timms and other Labour MPs are doing, because most of them are allowed to operate their own kind of autonomous agenda in terms of dealing with either individual constituents' questions or questions about the behavior of the local council or the central government coming to them from the likes of me, both empirically and investigative journalistically, and constitutionally, legally. So she can ignore the questions, she can bypass the questions, she can pretend not to understand, or she can pretend to be overwhelmed already by too many communications. Whatever she does is wrong in this context, because the first thing she should be doing is to be acknowledging the facts contained in each communication, or the facts as updated and contained in each of the communications, because every single time that I have been sending her communications questions, each one has been updated accordingly in the context. And the fact that she can be allowed to do whatever she likes and ignore most of the communications shows the Labour Party is unfit. So this is something that the Daily Mail and the Daily Express should be focusing on, about Corbyn's leadership, not about his sabotaging his own kind of election campaign by complaining about buses or whatever. And I have said on the evidence that Corbyn failed to even recognize the fact that local councils are, most of the decisions they make, they are being quite negligent and disrespectful to the people whose lives are affected by the decisions, or being contemptuous of the duty they owe to the community about basic fundamental rights like housing and rights like the complaints the people have against the previous sets of hundreds of or thousands of decisions made by the local council's employees. Corbyn never, ever has gone on the record as saying that there is any need for any accountability by council employees. Corbyn has ignorantly and irresponsibly repeated the slogan given to him by trade unions and others about workers. Of course, workers have absolute right to be protected and acknowledged in the correct jobs that they do. But if they do the wrong things and if they attack the rights of the people who are not workers but single parents and ordinary people, people out of jobs or people in low income and doing other things, or freelancing, or are between jobs, or are on benefits for absolute legitimate reasons. If those people who form a majority of the people who contact the council for service, if those people are wrongly treated, badly treated, and treated with bias and spite by the individual decision makers involved in their particular cases, then those people have nowhere to go. So their lives come down, the quality of their lives gets worse and worse and worse, and nobody takes any notice. This is a serious crisis ongoing beyond the pandemic, before the pandemic, for decades. The only people that can actually redress this and rectify this are people who are leading the Labour Party and making the decisions in the name of the Labour Party. And if that doesn't happen, then there should be a media, there should be a press, there should be journalism investigating this, because this is a really serious thing that affects and violates millions of people across the country. And this year's award for the Paul Foot Award for Investigative Journalism that Ian Hislop and the Private Eye are boasting about was given to a journalist who is a new journalist, and we shall be talking about that award in the next edition. So this is coming to just two minutes to 22 GMT.